Oh, stand over, okay. Sorry.
Not too much.
Okay. Just a quick note on that. If you recall, just not so I don't confuse you, there's 4 videos on, but we've had 5 classes. But class 1 and 2 I combined into one. So part 1 is our first night's class and our second night's class. So anyway, just know that so I don't confuse you. Too bad. Well, okay, last week, and a little bit of the week before, we spent our class time trying to understand a perspective on 2 realities, the perspective, the reality of life and reality of death. And we learned that we come to know reality, we come to know truth, or what we believe to be truth, by using our senses and our observation. We use our sight and our smell and our touch and hearing. We use those senses to help us arrive at what is reality, what is real, what is true. But we also learned that our senses will let us down, right? Mm-hmm. I demonstrated that a lot last week. And so the challenge, the problem that presents is sometimes we think we know what is true, we think we know what is reality, but oftentimes we're fooled. We don't really have the true picture of reality because our senses will let us down. And if you remember last week, I showed you a couple little video clips with the illusionist David Blaine. He made himself levitate. And to us watching and to the people that were there watching him, it looked like he levitated. I mean, to the eyes, it looked like he levitated. And then the other video was him bending the bars in prison. To the prisoners watching and to us watching, it looked like he bent those bars. In fact, somebody asked, I think it was
He did.
He did.
He did levitate.
Yeah.
He did bend.
And he did bend.
And it bent. It sure looked like it, didn't it?
He did.
Yeah, Tina said-
I'm convinced.
Tina said he stuck his arm through there.
Yeah,
I said,
yeah.
no.
You never heard that song, they wouldn't bend, they wouldn't bow, they wouldn't burn from being bent.
Well, I can tell you this. There's a trick to those things. Okay? It's not reality. And so what I thought I would do to start out tonight is just show you one illusion that is the typical illusion, sawing somebody in half. Looks real from our eyes, but it's really not.
Well, I saw you make an elephant disappear one time.
That's right. You saw that in Old Testament class, if I recall correctly.
That elephant, I mean, he was gone.
Yep, he was gone, wasn't he? And so to the
He
eyes,
was there,
it
but,
was-
yeah,
yeah,
on all 4 legs, but he was gone.
he was gone.
Yeah,
He gone.
he gone.
So I want to show you tonight, just before we start into class, I want to show you, just so you can see that there is a trick to these things, how they do some of these things. Because our eyes can let us down, and the truth of the matter is there's a trick to these things. So I'm going to let you watch this just so you can see how just one sampling of one of these tricks, how it's done. So I think you might enjoy this.
Oh, great. Why did you watch it, Tina?
All magicians know that this image right here
Yeah, I saw
is the
that.
most vulnerable part of the whole trick.
Tuesday on Penn and Teller Fool Us, Penn and Teller broke down the classic magic trick of sawing a woman in half. So I guess this is one we can try at home.
Georgie's a rather special case because Georgie's almost 6'3". So bring out on my side of the stage, I'm 6'7". You're not supposed to notice when she lay down, she shrunk right up to 5'10". The tabletop is not as thin as you first thought. The trim is thin, but the black goes back in a wedge. But it's underneath the box has plenty of depth to conceal that part of Georgie that's no longer accounted for. So the blade doesn't really come that near to Georgie. I mean, you can't even feel the breeze off that picture. And it's completely safe. There's a metal rod in place that stops the saw blade from going to...
Oh, gosh. Oh, stop.
She's
but she.
Oh my gosh, it's awful.
Maybe there's not a trick to it.
I thought you were supposed to know the trick.
You ain't never raised no chickens, have you?
We got Liv on that one, I think. Well,
And I was watching.
Okay, no more retirement for Tom.
he's got too much time in his hands.
Pain medication.
Well, I think after last week and even tonight, we should be convinced that seeing is not always believing, right?
I seen that.
Our own senses can let us down when we try to arrive at what is truth. Our eyes don't always give us a true picture of things. Now, I'm going to rest my case on this. I'm going to give you just one more quick little video. I want you to watch this, and I want you to tell me whether the balls in the circle that you see are going in a circle or are they moving in a straight line. Now, you watch it and you'll see this is not a magic trick. Now, just watch these balls. Are they going in a circle or are they going in a straight line? What is it? Are the balls moving in a circle? They
They're
moving in a
moving
straight
in a
line?
circle, but they're in a straight line.
They appear to be moving in a circle.
Yeah, they certainly appear to the eyes to be moving in a circle, don't they?
They're straight line.
They sure look like they're going in a circle.
I guess you just take one ball and follow it.
Yeah, again, I think my point should be made by this time. Clearly, our eyes can deceive us. We don't always get a true understanding of reality. The reality of that is that those balls are all moving in a straight line. But our eyes perceive that as the balls moving in a circle. The same was true with the man levitating or the man who bent the bars and so on. Our eyes don't always tell us the true story of what reality actually is. But that's what we use. That's how we come to determine what is true and what is not true, by using our senses and using observation. And that's how we generally arrive at what we believe to be reality, what we generally believe to be the truth.
Well, what did the man do to levitate?
Yes.
Well, a lot of the tricks that you see from these illusionists, they don't give those away. That's how they make money, and so they don't give those away. Now, as it happens, because I have an interest in that, I do have a long video that shows how they do a lot of those tricks. But how they do the levitation, the way he does it, I don't know. I do know how they levitate the lady that will lay back and so forth.
Yeah.
And sometime we can look at that. But just rest assured, there's a trick. These guys are professional, and they know how to work the audience and make it appear as if what you're looking at is reality, when it's really not.
Well,
And-
David Copperfield can do it. He can be one place one minute and next time.
So you're saying, Tom, that he is not levitating?
He's
You
not
saying
levitating.
he's on the ground?
He's on the ground.
But then it looks like through the eyes that he's up in.
To your eyes, it looks like he's levitating. To your eyes, it looks like a person's being sawed in half. And on it goes. If you've ever gone to shows that illusionists put on, like David Copperfield, Siegfried and Roy, and those people, you'll see some amazing things. And unless you know that it's a trick, to your eyes, you'll think that's really happening. And my point, again, is to try to demonstrate to you, first of all, that our senses can let us down when it comes to determining reality. And that's the point I want you to get, because we're going to carry that with us a little further tonight. And as we get further into the book, we're going to look at that rather deeply. And so the first thing I want you to grasp is the understanding that in our quest for truth, particularly in our quest to know the truth about two realities, life and death, our eyes, our nose, our ears can fool us. Oftentimes we don't have the truth by using our senses. And so that's what we've got to recognize first of all, and that's why I wanted to demonstrate these things to you, so you'll understand that point. And I believe that this is the case regarding the two realities of life and death. I don't think that most people have the true understanding, the reality of what real life is and what death actually is. And I believe that the only way to find the truth of these two realities is from the creator of life and death. And that's where we're headed. We're going to talk more about that premise shortly. But I just wanted to begin by demonstrating, as you, I think by this time, can clearly see, that our eyes, our ears, our smell, our touch, and so forth can let us down, and often does. And yet we go through our life thinking we know what truth is, when in many cases we don't have the correct perspective on certain things. And I think that's true with perhaps the two most important realities that we could understand, life and death. And so that's where we're headed with this study. We're going to focus on life and we're going to focus on death and understanding the realities of them, meaning the truth. Remember when we talked about reality, we're talking about that root word, real. What's real? When we talk about reality, we're posing the question of what is real. And I think a lot of us have a false understanding, particularly on these two realities, life and death, of what it really is, what it really means. And I'm convinced myself that we've got to get a different perspective on these two realities, life and death, if we're ever going to understand what real life means and what death really means. We've got to get a different perspective. And I think the Apostle Paul agrees with this. Look at what he says here. He writes in Romans, "Therefore I urge you, brethren." Now understand what this passage, what he's saying. He's saying, listen, write this down as a note. You might want to keep this in mind. No, he's urging his readers, his audience. He's urging them to understand something. He says, I urge you. By the mercies of God, I urge you. This man is serious about wanting you to get this. I urge you by the mercies of God. And he goes on to present your bodies a living and a holy sacrifice acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world. He's urging these people, don't be conformed to this world. In other words, don't think the way this world thinks. Don't rest your perception of things, your perspective on things, based on your senses, your eyes, your nose, your touch, your taste, and so on, because Paul knew that these things let us down. And that's what I've been trying to lead up to all along over the past 2 weeks, to show you that these senses that we use will let us down. And Paul clearly is affirming this when he says, don't be conformed to this world, but he says, be transformed by the renewing of your minds. in effect, what Paul is saying is, think about things differently. Okay? Be transformed. Don't think the way the world thinks. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, by getting a different perspective on things. Paul understood clearly what real life means and what death truly means. Paul had a glimpse. We've already gone over this passage, but Paul had a glimpse of heaven. And Paul understood exactly what death really means in the eyes of God and what real life is. And Paul is trying to get his audience to understand the same thing. Paul is teaching here exactly what we're teaching in this class, to help you get an understanding of what the reality of life and death really is. And here he states it. Don't be conformed to this world. Don't think like this world thinks, but be transformed. Think differently. Be transformed by how? How do you do that, Paul? By the renewing of your mind, by getting a new perspective on things. Paul recognized that any earthly perspective is a false perspective. And so Paul urges that his readers, his audience, be transformed. How are you transformed? By the renewing of your mind, he says, so that then you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. And so I think clearly Paul understood what real life is and what death truly means to the eyes of God. And that's why he urges us, and he's not just saying this in passing, he's urging us. He's exhorting us. He said, man, you got to get this. You got to get this. This is important, he's saying. I urge you by the mercies of God to get this. Guys, this is important stuff.
Yeah.
Understanding what real life is and what death means through the eyes of God is important stuff to the Christian. And Paul is saying that right here. He's saying, I'm urging you guys, pay attention. Get this because this is important. And so here we have Paul clearly confirming this. Paul was well aware that we have the wrong perspective on life and death because we have an earthly perspective on these things. And again, that's what I'm calling us to do in this class. By the time we finish, I truly hope that you will see life and death, these two realities, as they really are. But I think the only way to see them as they really are is seeing them through the eyes of God. I don't want you to tell me what real life is if I can know what it is from God. Because God is the only ultimate source of what real life is and what death is.
Amen, brother.
And so our quest is to see if we can figure out how to look at these realities through God's eyes. And we're going to do that. You're going to be able to see things through God's eyes. But first, we've got to build a foundation to do that. And that's where we're headed in these classes. And that's why, frankly, each one of these classes is so important. But particularly, these next two or three, because we're going to get the hard stuff first and get it out of the way. But we'll deal with that, and you won't even know it's hard stuff. Okay? The way we deal with it, you won't even know it's hard stuff. You're just going to get it. But the reason that Paul could say what he says here is because he had the right perspective, because he had God's perspective. He was seeing life and death as God sees it. And after seeing life and death as God sees it, Paul could write this, and he says, I urge you, man, you got to get this down, because this is important. And so here we have Paul clearly confirming that. Well, let's take this knowledge with us and carry it just a little bit further. And here's just my note that confirms what I just said, but Paul urges us, he's pleading with us, he's exhorting us not to see, hear, smell, taste, or feel as the world does. That's how we come to truth, remember? That's what we've been talking about the last 2 weeks. That's the tools that we use to arrive at what we think is true. But Paul's saying, no, you got to use the tools from a divine perspective, an eternal perspective, as God sees these things. And so rather to be transformed by a change in how we think, see, hear, smell, taste, and so on, he calls us to be transformed by renewing our perspective, by looking at things the way God is. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, sir.
Well, then let's take what we've learned over the past few weeks and carry it to the next level now. And I want to do that by first asking you a question. How precious is your life to you? Now, don't give me some answer that you think the teacher wants to hear. Think about it yourself. But for you, how precious is life to you? And just how important is your life to you? Ever been asked that question before? Anybody care to throw a thought out? Just how precious is your life to you?
Well, precious is gold.
Precious as gold. It's pretty precious.
Yes.
Well, it comes from God, so God gave it to me. So therefore, it's very precious to me. Because He can.
Okay. Anybody else? It's interesting. A survey was done a few years ago. The George Barna Research Institute out of Ventura, California is famous for doing these research projects, but their statistics that they come up with are quite accurate. And a lot of Christian groups recognize how accurate their numbers are, and so they rely upon them. But a survey was done a few years ago, sampling people at random. Didn't matter whether they were Christian, non-Christian, or what, just sampling people at random. And they were asked this question: if you could acquire more of something that you already have, what would it be? If you could get more of something that you already have, what would it be?
Wisdom. Most people probably say money.
Yeah.
There you getting in the world.
Maybe time with those you love.
Okay,
Yeah, but wisdom-
Betty's onto something here.
Wisdom would bring you money,
Right.
like King Solomon.
Yeah, most people would say things like money, health, maybe good health, wisdom, as someone said. But Betty's onto something here. The answer most generally given by most people was time. If you could get something that you already have and more of it, what would it be? Time was the answer that most people gave. Above all else, people wanted more time. More time. That was the most valuable commodity that most people held to when asked that question. If you could pick anything, what would you pick? That was the most valuable commodity that people chose. Well, have you ever thought about this in light of that? We're all guilty of saying things like this. And here's a guy trying to get more time out of things. But we're all guilty of saying things like this. If only I had more time. Yeah? I would have finished, but I ran out of time. We tell that to our boss all the time. I'd have finished, but I ran out of time. Where has the time gone?
That's right there.
Yeah. If he could just have lived a little longer so that I could have had more time with him. Yeah. It seems like her life had too little time. I didn't have enough time with her. I don't have time to do it today. Please give me just a little more time. Sorry, but time just got away from me.
Ain't it amazing how time
Time's up.
There's song.
I don't have time to put up with this. Yeah, there's an advertisement that says I don't have time for the pain.
Yeah.
Yeah. We never seem to have enough time. And that's why when questioned, most people say if you could have something more of what you've already got, what they want is more time. How true that is. You probably already read this somewhere in my book, but it's true that American people, we spend in this country over $2 billion every year on medical procedures, pharmaceuticals, health foods, gyms, a new kind of medical equipment, all in an effort to give people more time. We'll do anything. We'll spend any amount of money to gain a little more time. Another year, another month, another week, sometimes even just another day. We just want more time. More time. I mean, we're obsessed, particularly this country, we're obsessed with living as long as we possibly can. Putting back death as far as we can just to live a little longer. That's the truth of this country. And yet, no matter how much time we seem to have on this earth, it's never enough. In our eyes, it's just never enough, right?
That's right.
No, the older you get, the faster it goes.
Faster it goes, exactly. And you reach that point, like I've reached in my old age, thinking, time's almost up. If I had just had a little more time, I could have done more. Just give me a little more time, right?
I've also heard the saying is, and I don't know how in the world I had time to work with after I retired. I have to do what I have to do now.
Yeah. I've told Kathy that too.
Just last week.
Yeah.
How did I get everything done?
Yeah. We just never seem to have enough time.
But wouldn't we, if we really realized what heaven was about, that we wouldn't worry about that?
Well, that's what we're going to take a look at.
Oh, okay.
Hold that question.
You're so good.
Yeah, how many questions? That's what I'm waiting on, is to get there. The sooner the better.
All ready?
We're certainly going to look at that, Betty. Absolutely. We are. We've got to take a look at that. But it's interesting that, particularly in America, but worldwide, we want more time. More time is what we're after. I don't know if you can read these or not, but guys, this is some funny stuff. Put on your glasses if you can. Come forward if you can, because this is funny stuff. But it's true that people will even stoop to the level of exercising and working out in gym and even eating good, healthy food, all in the effort of buying more time, right? So true. I love this one up here. Doctor, I don't know if you can read it or not, but the doctor telling his patient, what fits your busy schedule better, exercising 1 hour a day or being dead 24 hours a day? For the lady who says, I put my days of overeating behind me. Now I'm here to work it out. Well, how true it seems to be that we're always on a quest for more time, and we'll reach into our savings account and take that money out if we can buy ourselves a little more time. But the truth of the matter is that nothing we can do will ever give us the amount of time that we think we want here on this earth. Right? Now, I think it's interesting that man considers life, this way, as the most, man considers life to be the most precious possession that we could hold. And yet we've got to understand and wonder if our perspective on that is really a right perspective. I mean, we've already destroyed the fact that our eyes, our ears, our mouth, our tongue, our smelling, and so forth let us down in our quest to know the truth. Right? We've already seen and demonstrated that. So we can't help but wonder, do we have the right perspective on things? Particularly things, again, like life and like death. And is it really true that life is the most precious commodity that we could hold? Consider the perspective from another angle. Maybe? There we go.
Maybe.
Man generally considers life to be the most precious of all commodities. The survey that was taken by the Barna Group demonstrates that. Now, your answer might have been different had you been sampled on the street, but this was a sampling of a large number of people, some Christians, some Muslims, some Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, and so on. And out of that sampling, the wide majority of those people said they wanted more time. That's what they wanted. Because they found time in their life to be the most precious thing that they could hold to. But while we consider perhaps life to be the most precious commodity. Look at what is precious to God. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. If God's perspective is correct, then it seems to reason that we're looking at life and death from the wrong perspective. If we consider life to be the most precious of all commodities, and yet God's word says that precious in his sight is the death of his saints, which is it? Is it life that's precious? Is it death that's precious? Now, remember, our perspective in this class, our objective in this class, is to look at things from God's perspective. And so we're going to, at some point, try to get away from looking at things from our perspective and start looking at everything through God's eyes, through his perspective. And we already see that God has labeled death as precious in his sight, while man has labeled life as precious. And so there seems to be a paradox here, a dichotomy, a difference. It doesn't seem to add up. Man doesn't seem to match what God says. Well, there's something else interesting here. We've seen that man is constantly looking to buy more time. And yet think about this. Think about something that's interesting. Man is constantly looking to buy more time. We just want a little more time, right? Isn't it interesting that there is a source where we can get all the time that we could ever imagine? An eternity of time, in fact. Where can we get that on earth?
Nowhere.
Nowhere. But we can through God. You see, man's search to gain more time is limited to this earth. Medical procedures, pharmaceuticals, gyms, health food, on and on and on. That's how we tend to seek more time. And yet, we can find an eternity of time with the Creator of life. Isn't that interesting? That here we are, beating ourselves up, trying to find a way to get more time, and yet the answer is right in front of us. If we want more time, an eternity in time, for time, in fact, we can have that. That's offered to us by the God of the Bible. But like I said, it seems like the most important two realities that I think we can study and understand is the reality of life and the reality of death. And it's interesting that our understanding of time is intrinsically tied to these two realities, life and death. Time sort of binds these two realities together. And so we have to examine time if we're going to attempt to understand what real life is and what death truly means through the eyes of God. And so if we're ever going to understand life and death, I believe that we're going to have to look to the Creator of life and death. I don't think we're going to find it anywhere on this earth, be it through another person, be it through another very, very, very smart person, be it through money, pharmaceuticals, medical procedures, and on and on and on it goes. If I had $1 trillion billion, could I buy myself more time? I might buy myself a little bit of time because this medical procedure might keep me alive for a little while longer. But I can't come close to buying an eternity of time. So I think if we're going to understand these two realities, we've got to look to the ultimate creator of these realities, life and death. That just seems logical to me, and I hope it does to you. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, as I said, we're going to do that by trying to see if we can peer through the eyes of God. I think if we could see life and death as God sees it, I think we would come away with a totally different perspective on these realities. And that's what Paul says we should be doing. Right? We've already looked at Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. I urge you, my brothers, don't be conformed to the world, be transformed by the renewing of your minds. I urge you. And so that's where our quest is taking us, to see if we can look at these things through God's eyes. And I think we can do that. We're going to have to begin, however, with laying a foundation, and we're going to have to begin with looking at what is frightening to many people. And I'll throw a big $20 word out at you, but I'm going to caution you, do not let these terms frighten you. We're going to have to take a look at God's metaphysical properties. Now, you know what this means, even if you don't know the word, because you know that God is supernatural, right? He's beyond the natural. He's beyond nature. He created nature, so he's beyond it, right? So metaphysical is just referring to those supernatural things, the things that aren't in nature, that we can look at, we can see, we can touch, we can feel with our senses. They're beyond that. That's the realm that God exists within. And we're going to need to take a look at those metaphysical aspects of God if we're ever going to understand life and death through God's eyes. Now, as we do that, it's going to pose more questions. It's going to bring up question after question with you as we go through it, but that's okay. The more we seek God, the more questions we're going to find, but the more answers we're going to find along the way. Now, you may not find the answer to every question that you're seeking, but along the way, in your diligent search to find God, you're going to find answers to other things. And when will we find God? When we seek Him with all of our hearts and all of our souls and all of our minds, right? That's when we'll find Him. I take from that we won't find Him if we don't seek Him with all of our hearts and all of our souls. I think the opposite is true. You'll find Him when you do this, but you won't find Him if you don't do that. And so that's where our quest should be. Genuinely seeking to know God. And how are we going to do that? How are we going to be able to look at things on this earth through the eyes of God? Well, I think the more we know about God, the clearer it is for our vision to be able to look through the spectacles of God, if you will, through the eyes of God. If I wanted to see things the way Lib sees things, how might I go about doing that? It seems like if I really want to see things the way Lib sees them, because her perspective on things is likely not going to be the same as mine, right? So if I want to see things the way Lib sees things, probably my best chance to do that is to find out everything I can about Lib, to know her completely, so that I can look through her eyes and see the world as she sees the world. And I think that's why Scripture tells us we'll find Him when we seek Him with all of our hearts. Because the more we seek Him, the more we know about God, the more we can see through His eyes. And the more we see through God's eyes, the more this world's going to fade away. And the reality of life, the truth of life, will start to pop up in front of us. And that's what we're after, is knowing the truth about these two realities, life and death. So, our quest to begin with is going to be to try to find out some of the deeper things about God. And a lot of that has to do with looking at God's metaphysical properties, His supernatural properties. Okay? Make sense so far?
Yes.
$20 word doesn't scare you.
No, that's good.
Don't let those words scare you. And now a lot of people, professors and so on, they love to use those words to make the students think that they're so smart. That's
Just the first row of the choir, Liam.
just first row of the choir.
Just the first row of the choir.
First row of the choir.
Okay.
Oh,
I'm not following that one, but that's okay.
Have you not seen Liz enjoy the music on Sunday morning?
Oh, I have.
But what, I mean,
Part of that, she's singing about that, she's singing
I
about
was
this.
listening to Tom, but what do you mean? I mean, what's me sitting on the front row got to?
You enjoy the music
Yeah,
on Sunday morning.
yeah.
You do that from the back.
And God is music.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
But I am worshiping the Lord because I love Him more
But
than
you
I do.
find
I
out,
know,
you
that
finding
was
out
just-
things through that. You finding out things about God through that music.
That was just supposed to be funny.
It was.
It is
It's okay, Liv, we're not gonna lose it
I
here.
enjoy it.
She read the second chapter of this book. That's deep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I'm gonna get you through this second chapter.
Yeah, it is.
Because once you get through that, you're gonna sail. But it's really important to grasp an understanding of God's realm. And that has to do with our subject now, time, its metaphysical aspects. And so, listen to me on this just for a moment. I'm not just suggesting to you that we need to understand God's metaphysical properties, his aspect, his supernatural characteristics. I'm not suggesting to you that we know that. I'm telling you, if you don't grasp who God is, his metaphysical, his supernatural properties, you're not going to understand what true life is, and you are not going to understand what death means in the eyes of God. You're just not. You won't. You think you might grab it. You will not unless you understand the medical, physical aspects of God, his realm, his eternal realm that God exists in, and other aspects of God. Those are absolutely essential if you really want to understand how God looks at death. And so again, I'm not suggesting that you learn it. I'm telling you that if you don't, you're just not going to fully grasp death and what real life is. And so that's where we're headed with this. I want you to grasp these things. So, we're going to jump into looking at these things because I think this will enable us to understand death as it really is, the reality of it. Now, after we go through some introductory thoughts in the book and the first chapter, we're going to jump right into chapter 2 and look at some of these things. It will be our most complicated part of this course that we're going to look at. So it will get easier after you grasp an understanding of chapter 2, I promise you. So what I decided to do, instead of jumping to the book right now, I think I'm going to let you listen to a video. Now this video may take you may come out scratching your head. This is Dr. William Lane Craig. The man is just brilliant. And he's trying to explain time and God's relationship to time. Now, if you don't grasp what he's saying, that's okay, because I really think I can simplify it for you as we go through this. But I wanted to start with the hardest, and it might confuse you a little bit, but you'll grasp some things from it, and it's going to make everything easier from this point. So, without me saying anything more, let me bring on Dr. William Lane Craig.
One of the most perplexing things about reality is what seems obvious, time. We've all wondered about it. But when you think about time and then you think about God, then the two together really cause complexity. How do you deal with God and time?
I remember one philosopher who said that if the philosophical importance of a topic can be judged by the amount of nonsense written about it, then the concept of time comes somewhat ahead of the concept of space and somewhat behind the concept of God. Right. And you put God and time together, you have a subject that is truly baffling and mind-expanding, one of the deepest. I spent 13 years working on this topic as my major research interest, and it's an inexhaustible study.
All right, 13 years worth. Tell me what you learned.
Well, I think we need to talk about the nature of time most fundamentally. I think that this is the question. And philosophers have distinguished two radically different concepts of time that will profoundly affect how you view reality and I think how you view God's relationship to time.
Okay, what are they?
One view of time is what we might call a dynamic theory of time, or a tensed theory of time. And what it says is that time is, the moments of time are ordered by past, present, and future. And that these are real and objective aspects of reality. The past is gone, it no longer exists. The present is real. The future has not yet come to be and is not real. And so the future is not sort of out there ahead of us down the line waiting for us to arrive. The future is pure potentiality. Only the present is real. And so things in time come to be and pass away. There is real, objective, temporal becoming in the world as things come into existence and then pass out of existence. That's the dynamic process or tensed theory of time.
Tense meaning that there are verbs which have past tenses and present tenses and future tense.
Yes, and that those tenses express objective
Reality.
features of reality. That's the key.
Now, sometimes you call this the A theory. the
That's right.
dynamic
That
theory.
comes from the British idealist J.M.E. McTaggart, who distinguished these two theories, I think, first of all among thinkers, and called one the A theory and the B theory. Not too descriptive, but a convenient
So
label.
the A is the dynamic one.
That's
the one
right.
that I would say is the common perception.
I think it is the perception of the common man. It's the common sense view.
It's a little hard to discern what is the present because we're moving through the present. I don't know how long the present lasts.
That's right, yes.
That's a little difficult. But
That's
okay.
a difficult question.
But let's say we have the dynamic theory. Theory A, past doesn't exist. Future is a potentiality. Now, what's the B theory?
The B theory, or the static theory, or the tenseless theory of time, says that the difference between past, present, and future is just an illusion of human consciousness. That in fact, all moments of time are equally real and existent. The future is as real as the present, is as real as the past. So for the people in 1868 is real, and we are in the future. For the people in 2050, we are in the past, and the present for them is real. But all of those are just subjective standpoints of those observers. In fact, if you could stand back and see things from a sort of God's eye point of view, all moments in time are equally real, and temporal becoming is just a subjective psychological feature of human consciousness, not a real feature of the world.
Moving in this path.
That movement, that sense of movement, is a purely subjective illusion
Because
of consciousness.
each place in this four-dimensional space-time block is equally real.
That's correct, and that is one way to conceive of it, is that the universe is a four-dimensional reality, not a three-dimensional reality which elapses or goes through time. Really, things are extended in four dimensions, and the whole space-time block, that whole four-dimensional block, just exists timelessly. And this point of view, though very counter to the common sense view of time, is very prevalent among physicists and people in the scientific community and certain philosophers as well.
Why is that?
Well, I think the main reason is that thinking of reality in four-dimensional terms makes the special and general theories of relativity very easy to grasp. It's easy to make a space-time diagram on a piece of paper in which the horizontal dimension represents space and the vertical dimension represents time, and you can represent the whole process there on a diagram which depicts space-time. And I think many scientists interpret the diagrams as literal representations of reality, that reality really is a four-dimensional space-time block.
Because the interpretation is that absolute space and absolute time have been shown to be erroneous by Einstein.
I think that that is one of the major motivations behind the adoption of this B theory or tenseless theory of time, is the belief that the A theory, or tense theory, is incompatible with special relativity. Now, in fact, I don't think that that is true at all. I think it's completely compatible with special relativity. But I'm sure you're right that this is one of the major motivations for adopting this four-dimensional view.
Let's try to understand the B theory, the tense-less theory of time, because that's the one that's certainly counterintuitive to our normal way of thinking. What does that mean, tenseless? How do I deal with the fact that my children were born sometime in the past,
okay,
and I can't use a tense to describe that? Is there a sequence of events?
Yes, sequence is still real in the sense that the events in time are related as earlier and later than each other. And that is a real and objective relation. But what the tenseless theorists deny is that things are really and objectively past, present, and future.
So they can order things in an earlier or later sense, but they don't put a past tense on it as if it once existed and now does not.
That's correct. Your birth is always earlier than your death, whether they lie in the future, whether one is in the present, or whether both in the past. Your birth is always earlier than your death. But you see here, the word earlier has been robbed of all tense. There's no sense in which that which is earlier is past. It is a relationship which is akin to the less than and greater than relationship that stands among numbers.
By saying robbed, you're showing your own prejudice, I think.
That is an emotional
Others may
term.
say you strip out the artificiality that a human mind has injected into it.
Absolutely, that is what they would say. And they would say that there is no mind-independent becoming or presentness of reality. So it's a radically different interpretation of the world than the common sense view.
Do you think he was talking in circles or a straight line?
Well, what he said there's already passed. That's past.
So, but is he saying that?
Just right now, we're in the future. A minute's past, that's in the past. Each moment's the present. If this moment, in just a moment, it's going to be gone.
We need to switch places.
But what I gather, he's saying that time is an illusion. Is it an illusion?
Past, present, future.
What he's saying, the tenses, as we think of them, past, present, and future, that's how we think of everything. We put everything in terms of tenses, past, present, and future. I cut the grass yesterday, I'm going to the store tomorrow, and I was at work today, but I'm not at work right
But in
now.
God's eyes, in God's realm, there is no time.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, but no, not his.
What's that fourth dimension? I lost that.
Yeah, I lost it.
Well, we think of everything generally, we think of things in height and width, and we use that so that we can locate something. But if you add a fourth dimension, time, to that, then you have the ability to determine when that event happened.
Okay.
Not just where it's at, but when it happened. Now, if you got this, we'll just go on and carry this further.
No, you go ahead.
Let's just say we did.
Good, because I don't fully grasp this. Maybe Chris in the back does. And Chris, you're certainly welcome to add anything more to Dr. Kirk.
I better not be talking. Well, does it not just all amount to everything in God's time? There's no time.
Yeah, that's what we're gonna look at next. Because we've got to understand, and I'm jumping ahead, but I'll do just to sort of address that, because you're kind of me saying, wait, hold that question. But we've got to somehow address how it is that we explain God's realm. The Bible says God is eternal. And anything that is eternal cannot exist in moments. It can't exist within time. Because anything that is eternal, there's no time continuum. That's right. There was no beginning.
Right.
There's no end. So you have to eliminate time. So we can very quickly determine that God's realm exists outside of time, what we have trouble doing is understanding how that can be. And what I hope to be able to do, because I'm not smart enough to explain how this can be, but I think I understand it enough to explain to you that it can be. And that's really our quest, is for you to grasp the understanding, not exactly how it can be, but that it can be, that God can exist outside of the boundaries of time, outside of moments, outside of how we think of past, present, and future. And I think that we've got to get a grasp of that before we can, in order to be able to understand how God sees death. And I'll show you that as when we get to that a little bit later on. I promise you I will. But that's a first step, is we've just got to grasp enough understanding of this so that we can understand not necessarily how can this be, but that it can be. I can sort of see, okay, I sort of got it. I can see that it can be. I don't totally know how it can be. That's sort of, if you want to switch directions, we have an argument amongst Protestant churches as to whether God has predestined everything that occurs on this earth, or whether God has given man free will. And that argument has gone on for 700 years now. Well, I think it's a foolish argument, because I think the Bible speaks clearly that God has elected, that God has determined, that God's plan will come about. But yet the Bible seems also equally clear that God has given to man free will. Now, how God allows for both, how he reconciles both of them together, I don't know how he does it. But I know that he does it, because the Bible's too clear on it. The Bible's too clear that man has free will. It's also too clear that God is sovereign and his plan is going to happen, regardless of our free acts. Now, how God reconciles that, I don't know. I don't know how he does it, but I do understand enough to know that he does it. And that's where I hope we'll get with understanding time, is not that we'll grasp, because even our smartest people can't totally grasp this thing. You know, the Bible clearly tells us that there's some mysteries. Deuteronomy 29:29 says, you know, the mysterious things belong to the Lord our God. The secret things belong to God. And there's some things that we just don't understand. But I think that we can understand enough to grasp that these things can be, that God's eternal realm outside of time can be. And I want you to get an idea of that so that you can use that as we go through, because we're going to take the Bible and we're going to look at some things that cause you to question God, like God putting to death people, like Ezekiel's wife, Uzzah, who carried the ark, and God just zaps these people. You know, how can that be that God would do that if he's a loving God? Well, I think if we can understand the realm that God lives in, this timeless realm, then I think we can start to put these things together and we can understand. I think the light bulbs will come off and we'll say, oh, yeah, so I can grasp why God might do that. But I don't think it'll make sense until we grasp some of these fundamental things about God. And the hardest one is this realm that God lives in, this realm of a timeless realm where there's no moments, there's no past, present, and future. And as you see, theologians give that a name. We call it God's eternal now. He lives in an eternal realm. Everything happens now. Even as Dr. Lane was saying, you know, everything is sort of present. And so that's where I hope we'll get. And I think I can use some examples here that will help you understand it. I'm not going to use those tonight, but I think I can give you some examples that you'll say, oh, okay, I see how that works. But you'll just have to come back to get those examples. That's a carrot I hang in front of you.
I have a quick question. Is he an A thinker or a B thinker? What does he profess to be? Because I didn't get the sense he was choosing a side. I got the sense he was explaining two different arguments.
If you read, there's a good book called, I I think it's called Time, Understanding Time, 4 Views. He gives a view and 3 others. It's been quite a while since I read that. But he holds to something very similar to B. And I think you almost have to. I think you almost have to recognize that there's something beyond A. There's got to be.
Happens daily. Or am I dreaming that? I saw in the scripture that a renewing of our mind happens every day.
Maybe. I don't know. Anybody know that passage?
Don't look at me.
I'm not sure. It doesn't come to my mind right now. But, a lot of things don't come to my mind anymore.
All things come in my mind. I don't know where they come from. I like that.
Well, I think for tonight, if you can just again take what we've learned so far, that we don't have a true understanding of reality because our eyes, our senses let us down. We've seen that. Yes? We can see that our senses let us down. So we obviously don't have a true picture of reality for everything. I think that is particularly true with life and death, those 2 realities. And use that to carry forward. Okay, so now what do we do? If our senses let us down, then what do? We flop around on the bank like a fish out of water? No, we seek to see things the way God sees them and then bring it all together. And that's our first step. Okay, how do we see things as God sees them? We do that by understanding more about God. And probably the deepest thing we can grasp about God is God's realm that He lives in. God just simply does not live in the realm that we live in. So it's obvious He must see things differently than we do. You know, we have Isaiah, 55:8. My ways are not your ways, and neither are my thoughts your thoughts. Well, pretty obvious that one who is infinite, who is eternal, must live in a realm that the finite, us, do not live in. And so no wonder His thoughts are not our thoughts, and His ways are not our ways. So, with this knowledge that you have now, in the beginning, next week we're going to go through a few points on the introduction, and then we're going to go through chapter 1. We might get in, depending on how many questions you have, we might get into chapter 2. Okay? Now, I think I've told you this before. One thing I would like for you to do is we go through it. I'm going to actually project the pages up here. So you'll have your book in front of you, you'll have this up here. But if you have anything that you see you want to talk about, have questions about, or you want to discuss further, make note. And as we kind of get to that, let's talk about it. You know, this is your class, your time, so let's talk about it. If you see things that I've written that you don't agree with, that's fine too. Let's talk about that. Maybe I need to change something. So make notes on anything you'd like to talk more about. Maybe express your point of view on it and stuff. And let's plan to do that. Okay?
I think I found what I was talking about. Therefore, we do not lose heart. But though our outer man is decaying, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking.
Where's that at?
2 Corinthians 4:16.
How did you find that so quickly? You just got that sort of left?
Where do you say?
According to the Bible.
Oh, okay. Very good. Was this helpful tonight or too? Okay.
Tom, I want to ask a question, and I know it's going to sound stupid, and everybody in here is probably going to say, "What in the world? Why did she ask that question?"
Well, we'll all just laugh at you.
Okay. God said man was created in His image, right? What's that mean?
Well, I'll take a stab at that, and I'll let Chris take a stab at it.
Okay, because I mean, I'm just
Doors.
sitting here. I've always wondered that, but I was just never asked. I mean, because I think, well, now. But if God is eternal, but God don't have a body like us, because God's Anyway, if we're created in His image, how, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to give you my response to it because I have thought a lot about that in the past, and I think the way I see that is different than the way many people see it.
Okay.
I suspect it may be different in the way Chris sees it, so that's why I invite Chris to answer it as well. Here's how I see it, and I could be very wrong on this. Let's say you're an artist. You're a painter. You get your canvas out, pull your chair up, and you get ready to paint a masterpiece. What am I going to paint today? I think I'm going to paint a forest. I think I'm going to paint some rain. I see it. I got an image of what I want to paint.
Okay.
And you paint it from that image of yours. I believe, myself, that that's what that passage means. God knows how He wants us to be. He's got an image of how He wants us to be. And that's how He created us, in His image, the image that He wanted. Now, I think you can add to that, He gave us the characteristics that He wanted us to have, but I think that was part of that image that He had when He created man. And that's how I see that passage. Chris?
That makes sense. I had kind of thought about what you said, because you'd have to have the image to see us. If it was in His image, then He saw the image He wanted to.
Is that a physical image or one in your mind?
Come on, say Jay.
I've always thought that, first of all, I'll restate the statement. We're image bearers of God. We're the image bearers of God. It's even more fulfilled, I think, in the New Testament, because the Bible says if we claim to be His, we shall walk in the way that He walked. Therefore, we reflect His image to the world. So the things that God has, the love, the things that He's given us as human beings, we reflect that out in the world. Therefore, we are the image of eternal God.
So when they say image, they're not really saying more physical.
It's not. Yeah, there's more to your image than what people see.
Yeah, exactly.
What you do, the things, all those things. So I'm talking about the physical, the things that you project out into the world are the image of who you are.
And really what Chris is saying and what I'm saying are not counter-opposed.
Yeah.
Because God's image of us, if He were that artist sitting down to paint that, knowing that we're going to be image bearers of Him, His image of us is going to be such that it be one that when we're obedient to Him and walking in His will, we're going to reflect His image. The attributes of God, love and kindness and forgiveness and all those things. But those attributes, those characteristics, I believe, are contained in that image. If you want to view it as someone having this image in their head and they paint that, those attributes are contained, I believe, in that image that He paints. And so I don't think what Chris is saying and I'm saying are really counter-opposed. I think they can be one and the same. What do you think, Chris?
I agree.
I think growing up, we always thought he was talking about like
Physical.
Right, yeah. We've got to get away, I think, from that.
Yeah, that's world.
Because clearly the Bible tells us that God is spirit.
Right, that God is spirit, and how can He create us in His image?
Well, I think
That's
He
what-
can.
Yeah.
You know, in His
Was the image,
Mr. Tom, isn't that what would bring in glorifying Him? With His attributes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and we're going to spend a lot of time on that. The reason we were created to glorify God. And how do we glorify God? I think we clearly glorify God when we reflect His image. Well, how do we do that? Well, we do that by living as He calls us to live. Sinlessly. Complete obedience.
Letting Him live through us.
Yeah.
Let others see Jesus.
David, did you have something? Somebody back there. I said, okay. Is that helpful? Harmful?
Yes.
Painful? Okay. Well, we're a couple of minutes ahead of time.
That's good. That's all right.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so you can take it off if you haven't already. So remember, I'll have this on probably in the next day or two, but those